Parshas Chayei Sara. Right? You find it on page 106. Technically speaking, this shir is not sponsored by anyone specific. Thank you. But nevertheless, I think it would be appropriate to say that may the words of Torah be Le'ili Nishmas, the 11 people that were murdered in Pittsburgh this past Shabbos, and may the neshamas have an aliyah. And it's people are using the word shocked. Unfortunately, the fact that there's hatred out there, and the fact that we as a nation are not where we're supposed to be. It's not. I will not use the word shocked. I would use the word devastated more. That such loss occurs in a shul as people are davening, as people are trying to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the devastating it is. And the Recholim should have a refuah. There's actually a very strong Toronto connection. Dr. Bob Libman, which many of us know very, very well. I know Bob already for close to 30 years, and he lost his sister. I met her once, so the Neshamas of Asher have an aliyah. Okay, Parshas Chayei Sara. So what's happening in this week's Parsha is we have the passing and the eulogy and the purchase made by the patriarch Avraham to find the burial location for his wife, and his interaction with an individual by the name of Ephron. In our tradition, we have a negative view of this fellow Ephron because he's interested in getting everything there, getting a lot of money, retaining this great reputation. We talked about him in the past, so we beat up on him in the past, so maybe this year we'll give him a little bit of a break. But one thing we should be keeping in mind is that the rabbis, the rabbinic tradition, link the passing of Sarah with the portion that appears in the Torah right beforehand, at the end of Parashat Vayera, which is the binding, the Akedat Yitzchak. And the rabbis link the two. There is a midrash, a rabbinic tradition, that it is due to the fact that Sarah was informed about what was happening that overwhelmed her, and as a result she died. This is what the rabbis share with us. That's how they want us as if to walk into this portion, that you should be aware of the fact that this did not happen out of just old age, right? After all, she was 127 years old, and Mr. Shem by everyone. But rather, there is something that occurred before, in good health. Okay. Now, in good health. Now, the next portion is the story of the Shidduch, which is indeed a challenging parsha to go through. And what I mean is here is for Avram Avinu, the difficulty is marrying off his son Yitzchak. Yitzchak himself is not the one that goes out on the dates. There was no rent-a-car, right? There was no lounge, right? There was no meeting of the future or potential in-laws, but rather they send Eliezer on this mission. And Eliezer makes this journey. There's a reference in this parsha quite often to the Gemalim, to the camels. The camels play a very significant role in this week's portion. And the camels are the official animal of this week's parsha. Right? If you remember, your kids probably grew up on Sesame Street. And at the end there would be, today Sesame Street was sponsored by the letter L and the number 6. So this week's parsha is sponsored by the animal, the camel. Now there's a reason. The gamal, the word gamal relates to the word gmilut chasadim. and the gamal, which is carrying others on this long journey and not taking care of its own needs. It took care of its needs before beginning the journey by drinking a lot. And then it could go 10 days, 2 weeks without drinking. And that's what Gemilut Chasadim is, by the way, that you take care of yourself first, because that's important. And then after you take care of yourself, you do for the welfare of others. The Gamal does that. So it's Gemilut Chasadim, and this is a portion of Chesed. This is a portion of Chesed. And Rivka proves herself to be a woman that is concerned for the welfare of the stranger, for the welfare of the animals. And Eliezer realizes that he has to enter into negotiations with the family, and a conversation there begins. Now, we're going to focus specifically on what he states here. If you turn to chapter 24, verse 49, which is going to be on page 116. And twice in this portion, these two words come together. These are two important words that come together. So in verse 49 on page 116, he is basically trying to communicate with Rivka's family that she's the right one. And he turns to them and he says in verse 49, Ve'ata, and now, Im yeshchem osim, if you intend to go ahead and do the chesed ve'emes, if you intend to go ahead and perform this act of kindness and truth to my master, tell me. Otherwise, I'm going to have to go ahead and look to the right and to the left. And they, in verse 50, state, you know what? It is clear to us that this is a matter that was settled by God Almighty, and they give their stamp of approval. Okay, this is what we are told, that there is chesed and emet. Now, chesed is so much part of our tradition. Right? It's the essence of Judaism, concern for the welfare of others, the community, what we could do for others. Emet is actually quite fundamental as well. There is a truth. Right? There actually is a truth. We believe that truth itself does not reinvent itself in every generation. Truth is not subjective, but there is actually some kind of guidelines to what is the truth. Chesed and emet come together here. Come together in this week's Parsha. And he is trying to communicate that you should know that this act, what we are preparing here, to have this young lady marry Yitzchak, is an act of chesed ve'emet. Now, where else in the Torah do these two words come together? Chesed and emet. Okay, so...
We use it for Chevra Kadisha.
Oh, okay. So number one, you say Chevra Kadisha, so you're turning to Parshat Vayechi, where Yosef is told by his dad that you should know. It's chapter, in Bereshit, chapter 47, verse 29. And the last one, you're going to have to trust me. But in chapter 47, verse 29, where Yaakov says to him, listen, I don't want to be buried in Egypt. I want you to take me to the land of Israel, and you will do with me a chesed ve'emet. Chesed ve'emet. Okay? Two places where it appears in Bereshit. And then one more location is going to be when we talk about the attributes of God. And when we as Jews talk about the attributes of God, we are not just referring to some kind of entity that's detached from us, but rather this is an entity, and if we spell out these attributes, God Almighty is turning to the human race and says, by the way, I am like that because I want you to be like that. Learn from these attributes. It's very much, so much part of our high holiday season. And we say these 13 attributes. Hashem, Hashem, Kel Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Hapayim, V'Rav Chesed V'Emet. We say it over and over and over and over again. And to believe that it's just these statements we make, right? And somehow we achieve atonement by just saying things, that creates what we know as problematic Judaism, right? Because we have made our tradition into something quite pagan if we believe that just by uttering words, mission is accomplished. So therefore, the great rabbis tell us that when we talk about the attributes of God, you study them, you think about them, and you think about what commitment am I going to have to emet, right? If God is a God of truth, what am I doing for the sake of truth? If God is a God of kindness, of chesed, what am I doing for the sake of chesed? These are the questions that we are supposed to ask. So in these attributes of God Almighty, we say, Kel Rachum V'Chanun is chesed ve'emet, and that's it, 3 times in the Torah. Chesed ve'emet is God. He wants us to do that chesed and emet. In what 2 areas of Jewish law and Jewish practice are we supposed to apply chesed and emet? So number 1, it relates to the shidduch process, as we are reading with the story and with Rivka and Eliezer, and number 2 with burial. Okay? So this is what we know. Now the question is going to be, what exactly is the message of chesed and emet? What is that message? We have 2 words, okay? Kindness and truth. We all know what kindness is, right? We're very familiar with it. It is so much part of our life. We're familiar with truth. But when they come together, it creates something new. And what is this entity known as chesed and emet, this new package? What is the message here? Okay, that's the question that we're going to be dealing with. So now, in Jewish tradition, right, in the Talmud, we are often told that when there is a word that makes its appearance in one section, the rabbis quite often had a tradition that the word becomes like a code, and information, or if that word appears in a different section, you could transfer information from section A to section B due to the fact that a specific word makes its appearance in both of those sections. Now, don't try that at home. In other words, because you could go ahead and create all kind of funny laws by doing it. But the rabbis had a tradition, and they are teaching us something. That when a word appears in one section and in another section, information can be transferred back and forth. And that's actually all I want to do today. By the way, it's a very simple message here today. Chesed and emes appear by our story, the story where there is a building of a Jewish home. And chesed and emes makes its appearance when we are dealing with a burial, with a funeral, when we are dealing with what's known as the end of life. And what we're going to be told is the following. One of these 2 is really a chesed. One of them is really an emes. But what we are being told here is, be sure that your chesed has emes, and be sure that your emes has chesed. That's it. Okay, I'll translate. Be sure that your chesed has emet, and be sure that your emet has chesed. That's all what we are going to be addressing today. Now, it's time to explain what we are talking about. So let's start with marriage. Okay, let's start with some marriage advice. Marriage advice is, marriage is all about chesed. Is that a fair statement? It's about doing for someone else, right? It's a commitment. It's a commitment. It's a commitment to someone else. You go ahead and you are beginning this process of building this world, in essence. It's building the world, right? Building a home, building a future, building a life together, right? MS needs, in general, the general approach is throw MS out the window. Forget about the truth, right? That's the first piece of marriage advice, right? You get rid of the truth. That's, for example, right? You know, do I look good today? Right? Do I look good today? Right? So, last week, my wife, Miriam, told me that I looked good during the shir, right? So that's MS is out the window, and that was all chesed. That was all chesed. Isn't it? Like, the truth. What on earth does truth? There's a the song that they sing at every single wedding, Ketzad merakdim lifnei hakala. Right? So these are words from the Talmud. And the Talmud tells us, you know what you do when you are in front of the Kala? Right? What do you mean, how do you dance? It's not telling you how to dance. What do you say? Right? What are you supposed to communicate? You're supposed to communicate Kala na'ava chasuda, meaning forget about reality. Reality is irrelevant. Truth, please don't bring the truth to the marriage. Please focus on chesed. What does the other person need to hear? Right? So that's really, really the essence. Right? It is all about chesed. You know, the Talmud notes that lying is considered destructive. But where do we find it that you are supposed to lie? When it comes to shalom bais, to peace in the household. And who do we derive it from? From, believe it or not, the Almighty. Right? Last week's Parsha, when Sarah, right, is quite cynical that a child will be born with my Alta husband, right? And God Almighty decides to change that a little bit. Why? Shalom bais. Incredible message here, right? You know, the truth, the beast meshuga with the truth. That is what really a marriage is about, chesed. Now, however, when we are being told now that the chesed of marriage, it still needs, believe it or not, some emes. We have to bring it a little bit back in, or at least keep it outside, but by the window. It still should guide you. Emes, the truth, should still guide you, even when the essence and the foundation of this relationship is chesed. Now, what do I mean by that? You go to Buffalo sometimes. You go to Buffalo, so we Torontonians love going to Tops International. Right? I like going there. I like going there because I could walk to the kosher deli and I could see the kosher emblem of the BVK, and it was a VAD that I once ran like 20 years ago, and I had a lot of headaches. So to go there and look at it and see that it's someone else's headache, it's like an uplifting, that's what you're supposed to do as a person. Always look back at the challenges of the past and say, thank you, God, right, that someone else has to deal with them. So a few years ago, we're in Tops, and you look around to look at the 250 items that just got a kosher symbol, because everything is quite incredible there. And a young man walks up to me, and he asked me for a favor. Now, it's a young man, and he approached me because I had a kippah, and he had a kippah. And he said to me, I need a favor. What's the favor? I'm on my way to Canada. I'm 19 already. And into Canada, it's 100% legal for me to bring back beer, which obviously is much cheaper in Buffalo. However, I'm not 21 yet. I'm not 21. So therefore, I need you to do this act of chesed. Right? Chesed. If you could all you need to do is buy for me the beer. I don't know why he thought I'm over 21. But I said, the only thing, if you could please go ahead and cash on purchase the beer for me and then hand it would be an act of chesed. So I think from the motion of my head and my eyes, he realized that he's asking the wrong person, right? Because there is still an emes. In other words, the law of the land is, as far as I know, that under age 21 you don't purchase it. You don't purchase it for a minor, and that would be technically a minor. But he wanted the chesed, right? There has to be some emes, right? Even when you are doing a chesed. We talk about Avraham Avinu. And at the end of last week's portion, we talk about the fact that he had this eshel. He built an eshel be'Be'er Sheva. What is an eshel? Shalashudis, I talked about my childhood, that in my childhood, we lived in Mexico, and one time went on a Sunday to a place called Cuernavaca. What was in Cuernavaca? There was what they used to call a Moshe Skenim. Now they have much better names for the same thing. It was known as a Moshe Skenim, and it was known as the Eshel. So we'll go into the Eshel. What was the Eshel? The Eshel was this magnificent place where they took care of the elder. And why are we going? They're dedicating a new wing. How do you do that, I asked, and I was told that they cut a ribbon But I was told that before you cut the ribbon, no one has ever been inside the new wing. Right? So I remember as a child coming and standing by the ribbon and looking in, and I was first in awe that no one has ever walked in to this section. I thought that's something quite incredible. Then I had some difficulty because I saw some paintings on the wall. I was wondering how on earth did they get the paintings on the wall when no one has ever been inside. So that was the challenge I had at the time. But in Eshel, what really is an Eshel? So the Talmud shares with us two opinions. One opinion is that Avraham Avinu had an orchard. One says that he had an inn. Fine. But the Midrash tells us that Avraham Avinu was a person that when he wanted to perform an act of kindness, he would request from the person in need, what do you need? And they play with the letters Eshel, and they switch them around, and they read it as Sha'al. He would always ask the person, what do you need? Meaning, you know what true kindness is? True kindness is that you assess what the other person needs and then go ahead and do it, right? To go ahead, my father's mother, right? When she wanted to take us for a fun outing, so sometimes it would be to a wedding. Like she would tell us, in 3 weeks I was invited to a wedding. So it would be to this wedding of some old Uruguayans that they remembered, and they would take me as an 11-year-old for a big reward that would sit at a wedding and know absolutely no one. Right? But for the grandmother, she was sure that this is the greatest act of chesed in the world, because after all, I'm taking him to a wedding, right? So you have to remember, and this is something we could learn from Avraham Avinu, Sha'al. Ask me, is that really exciting? If you take me out and purchase a new soccer ball, so that is indeed a chesed. But to take me to a chasana, I don't think so. Avraham was Sha'al, but remember, Avraham's chesed, when he would do for someone, and the person would feel a tremendous amount of gratitude, he would turn to them and say, remember, don't thank me, there's a higher being, there's a purpose in existence. We could go ahead and have an impact on the world. Meaning his chesed was infused with emes, with the truth. And that's really when these two words appear here together. When the word chesed makes its appearance as we are preparing for marriage. And if the two words appear here, chesed ve'emet, and appear also regarding a funeral, by the way, is all about emes. And let me explain that what that means as well. When we talk about our souls, we understand that eventually the soul departs from the body and we enter into the olam ha'emes. We call it the world of truth. Right? Now, it's obviously overwhelming to think about that, but there is a truth. We have an entity called a neshama, and we have a responsibility. Now, sometimes, as a person is preparing for that stage of entering into emes, which has obviously its role, emes can be quite overwhelming, and you have to be careful with the emes. What do I mean by that? There is a concept in Jewish tradition known as a vidui, that before a person departs this world, they go ahead, I'm not going to use the word confess, but I will say that the idea is that you express, right, regret for what was done. You ask for forgiveness, and in our tradition, that really is significant, the vidui. But there's a great problem here, a great problem with this vidui issue, because you return to a person who's in a bed, and you say to them, "It's time to say vidui," and you know what they think? Thank you so much. Thank you. This is what you're telling me, that there's no hope. So it's an awful problem here we are dealing with. You want to do emes, you want to do the truth, but let's infuse some chesed here. How are we going to get the chesed into the emes? Remember, you have to get the chesed there into the emes. So Jewish law came up with this solution, a rabbinic solution that is brilliant. And it works as follows. And this, by the way, is so significant that it appears in Shulchan Aruch. In Shulchan Aruch, we are told that when you turn to a person and you say to them, it is time to do a vidui, you say you should know. Harbe hisvadu velo metu, bischar shata mitvadeh atachai. Many people said the vidui and nothing happened. And I'll tell you more, there's actually a tradition that in the merit of vidui, it is something that gives you life. This appears in Jewish law. And the brilliance of sensitivity. Sensitivity, you are able, it is a time of emes. It is a time of emes. No question about that. It is a time that you are facing a truth. But we have the ability of infusing into it chesed. There's a story, the Medrash tells us, that the prophet Yeshayahu comes to King Chizkiyahu, who was not acting appropriately regarding a minor issue in the big picture. And he says to him, Metata velo techyeh, you're dying. This is what the prophet says to the king. And the king responds to him, the Medrash tells us, tell me. The norm is a doctor walks in and gives him some medical advice, right? A person of kindness walks in and says, Mina shamayim, God, they should have mercy on you. And you walk in and that's what you're telling me. Okay, that's how the king responds to the prophet. Now you think about it, this confrontation is really when truth faces kindness. What is a prophet? A prophet is to communicate to us what is happening in the spiritual realm, in the realm of truth. What is a king? You know, what do kings do? There's municipal elections today in Israel. Right? If any of you are citizens, I hope you voted. There's elections in the United States. Now, what exactly do you do when you choose someone to take charge? What are they really supposed to do? You know, there was when we were in Buffalo, they had a person in charge of the Erie County. I forgot the name, the official controller of Erie County, and this head of Erie County, which included Buffalo and the Niagara region, sections of it, he went to Israel, made a visit to Israel, and he visited at the time, this is in the 1990s, he visited Peres and Rabin and Arafat, and he came back and he met some local members of the Jewish community, and he said to them, you know, let me tell you my impression of the Middle East and this peace process. Arafat doesn't want to be president. He doesn't want to run a country. Because let me tell you, what do you think I do? Talking about himself. You know what the only thing I deal with is garbage and sewage. That's the only thing I deal with day in, day out. Here and there I'll go to a ceremony. All I do is take care of the needs of garbage and sewage, garbage and sewage. You think Arafat wants that? You know, he's a hero running around the world, honored. He doesn't want to deal with the state. This is what the head of Erie County said in the middle of the
Representative.
Whatever. It wasn't the Washington. It was some kind of a local position, like a mayor of the region, we'll call it. So, what is a king if so? Right? Is he there for the honor? No. He is taking care of the needs of people. It's an act of chesed. So here we have this confrontation between the prophet, Mr. Truth, and the king, which is Mr. Chesed. And Mr. Chesed turns to Mr. Truth and says, that's not the way to do it. You got to be sensitive, right? You have to infuse some sensitivity when you're trying to communicate something that is indeed very, very important. So, you know, there is a question in Jewish law, which is something important. I was asked recently a question about someone that is not doing so well and lost a family member, and the question was, do they inform them? Do they inform them? Well, Jewish law says you don't. There's no need. Don't inform a person, right, when a person's in a state, right, that you don't know how this new information will have an impact on him. Keep quiet. Keep quiet. Don't say anything. But the truth, you know, what about the truth? No. Yes, it is a time if no one's denying that entry into the next world is a moment of truth. But remember the chesed. Transfer the chesed into the emes. Okay? There's a great story that among Hungarians, there was the great Chatam Sofer. The great Chatam Sofer, a rabbinic authority of the early 19th century. And he married the daughter, he was married to the daughter of another great rabbi, Rabbi Akiva Eger was his name. And they communicated through letters. Unfortunately, the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eger, the wife of the Chatam Sofer, passed away. And Chatam Sofer felt, even though he was in great pain, that there's no need for the father-in-law to know about it. And even through these communications, he would have to go ahead and get around the issue, never inform, he sensed, yes, it's a time of truth, but you know what? This will have a negative impact on him. There's no need for him to know. It will be too painful for him. You go ahead and sometimes, right, you have to infuse the emes with chesed. So I remember, this is also a painful chapter in my own family's history, that my father had he had two older sisters, right? So it was Nechama was her name, or Netchameh was her name, was the oldest. And then there's Aliza, so Zayin Gesund, my aunt in Israel, and then my father. And this daughter, Netchameh in the family, you probably haven't heard about her, no? In the family, just to give you an indication. She was a brilliant woman, and we're talking about incredible brilliance that of all family members. I mean, could write. My other aunt told me that she would write poetry in like over 9 or 11 languages. She's a very, very, very talented lady, and she worked for the United Nations. At one point in Nairobi. Mentioned her already? Oh, you see, it's a good Talmud. And then eventually in Paris. Fine. And she wouldn't visit Israel. But she communicated with my grandmother, her mother, by mail. Okay. Unfortunately, she got ill in the early 80s. She was a young lady in her early 50s. And she passed away in her early 50s. And then is the big crisis, how do you think my grandmother's going to deal with it? She had a weak heart, and family members, meaning my aunt and my father of Shalom, were sure that you get her the news, that's going to devastate her. So they made a decision. They're not telling her, but there was a problem. There were letters, correspondence going back and forth. What are we going to do? There were letters. She would get a letter every month from her daughter. What are we going to do? So we're dealing here with a talented family with some creativity. So my aunt Aliza in Israel decides, listen, I'm going to take care of it. It works as follows. Aliza at the time worked in the Knesset. She was the secretary of the Speaker of the House. And she came up with the following bluff, the following story, that there's a new thing called diplomatic mail that works much faster. And from now on, she turned to my grandmother, all letters you want to send to Netchameh in Paris, give them to me. I'll send them as a diplomatic mail. And all letters coming in from now on, you're not going to get them in your mailbox. You're not going to get them in the mailbox, but rather, you're going to be getting it straight from me, because from now you get... My grandmother was the happiest person, and every month, Aliza would sit down and write a letter with the exact same style, and things are happening in Paris. And what's the latest? Month by month by month by month, she would do that. And my grandmother had a collection of these letters from Netchameh. Now, there was one bump in the road, that there was this person, and the person, it was interesting, it was the day that I was going to visit my grandmother, and it seems to be that some person from Uruguay called her with words of condolence.
Oh.
So the family went into crisis mode. But they decided to deal with it. And I still remember my father coming in, and this was in Yiddish. And my grandmother says, "Das gehört, so and so called from Uruguay, but ich verstehe nicht, kann nicht sein." My grandmother says, "It can't be. I have the letters." Like, she was struggling with the issue. She has letters. So my father says, "Who called?" So she said the name. I don't remember who. My father said, "Oh, hey, it's Iver Bottle. He's like he's lost his mind years ago. What are you worried? You have letters, and an Iver Bottle person calls." That's absurd. She says, take is a very bottle, you know, why not? And that was the end of the issue, and she never knew. She never knew.
Wow.
Well, which part? I mean, I see in it, I mean, the kindness, or MS was thrown out the window. MS, I mean, again, it is a time of MS, that's really the point. It is the time you're facing the truth. But infuse it with chesed, This is what we are being told. And unfortunately, right, there are people that lack that seichel and feel that when they are dealing with someone ill, they have to share the truth, right? There are people that think that it's a time of truth. Like, you know, my late father, there was someone that turned to him and said, you know why, you got ill, because you left Israel. Someone said that, right? But what do you mean? He had to share the truth, right? And he knew the truth because, all fools are, know the truth. And where's the chesed, you ask? Where is the chesed? Now,
what happens in hospitals where they have to tell you the truth and maybe you don't want your parent or whatever to know the truth, but the doctors have to tell them.
The doctors have to figure out, before you present truth, a lot of thought has to go into it. And you have to speak to people who understand the need of the family and the patients, and a lot has to go into it. You don't just go ahead and present the truth as is. There has to be, the chesed has to be infused into the truth. That is really fundamental. Yes?
Sorry, I don't want to digress. I just want to quickly respond to Fran. They do that because they're so litigious. People are, if you don't tell them the truth, they sue. So it's a no-win situation.
Yeah. So it's yes, go ahead.
Out of curiosity, how long did this go on?
I think it went on for over 5 years.
Wow.
Over 5 years. I think she passed away in 83, 84, if I'm not mistaken. I think. And my grandmother lived till 89, so that's what we're talking about. So that was an incredible story. It would be interesting if someone has the letters, the fake, the diplomatic mail letters that Aliza sent. When we were in Baltimore. We were in Baltimore a few weeks ago, and we were sitting there. It was a bar mitzvah. And our daughter-in-law, Ahuva's grandmother was there. And she is Mrs. Feig, a very fascinating woman, very charismatic. She's really the leader of the family. And she's an Hungarian, but the real, the real. In other words, she's not, I'm sure I wasn't in her dining room, but I have no doubt there's a big chandelier there. There's no doubt, because the earrings were chandeliers. Yeah, so now, she's a very impressive woman. Like she draws, like you could tell. The grandchildren dress appropriately because you have to be sure that Bobby approves. Bobby or Bobby, right? Bobby, and if you call it, like when I spoke, I mentioned Bobby Agate, Uzi already comes over. Uzi already is afraid that the pronunciation is not correct. So she lives there in Montreal. She says, she's sitting there with us and she says, I come from a Litvische background. But let me tell you something, a problem I have with the Litvische. You go to a Litvische funeral, she says. You know what they're doing there? All they're doing is the rabbi gets up, and he starts sharing words of Torah. He's giving a whole shir of Torah. On the other hand, she notes, when I went to a Hasidic funeral, there they talk about the person who departed. That was her claim. Now it's true, because first of all, there's a niggin that they sing at a Litvische Levai. Litvische Levai is something that belongs in a Hollywood production at times. With all due respect, I have a tremendous respect to the Litvische tradition, but their Levayas could be fixed a little bit. Now, what's the problem? Sometimes there's this feeling, it's a time of emes, right? It's a time that the living have to remember. We're not going to be here forever. How do you inspire the living to live by values? Emes, Torah, correct? So Miriam did a wonderful job defending me. And she said, well, Miriam said, I've been at many, many funerals that my husband has performed, many, many. And every single time, he talks about the nifter. So I was defended there with honor against the challenge. But emes, remember the chesed. Now with that, let's go back to the beginning of the parsha. The Torah tells us that Sarah dies. Why does the Torah tell us, or why is that section presented right after the Akedah? Midrash tells us that Satan informs Sarah that you should know your husband is taking your child to Mount Moriah and have him as an offering. She was overwhelmed and she died. Why is the Torah, or why are the rabbis telling us that this is the first piece of information that we need to walk into this portion? Because Chayei Sara is a parsha about eulogy, right? And you should never have to ever go to a funeral, Parshas Chayei Sara, or any funeral. But Parshas Chayei Sara is that parsha that is all about eulogizing, and all about tears, and all about remembering, and all about being inspiring, and all about reminding humanity that there is a truth. But the rabbis want us to walk into this portion and tell us that you should know that if you only walk in with truth, if you go ahead and tell Sarah about the status or what's happening to her son and she's not prepared for it, and you kill her, that truth is the truth of the Satan. Be careful with your truth. Use some seichel. Right? Even what's occurring over the past few days, right, with the shooting in Pittsburgh, that people do not have the sensitivity to go ahead and start saying, yes, observe, not the sensitivity that is lacking because they believe that there is a truth and they ignore chesed. I mean, that is a problem, a very significant problem. When Eliezer says the words chesed ve'emes, we learn from it that marriage is all about chesed, but please remember there's an emes, there's a truth, there's a purpose, right? To go ahead and just perform acts of kindness and forget why we are here or why are we doing all these wonderful acts, that is no good. Be inspired by Avraham Avinu, that he was chesed l'Avram, he was all about chesed, but he always infused the chesed with emes. But the Torah is telling us that just as the chesed ve'emes in Parshas Chayei Sara is telling us that these two words need to learn from the emes that appears in Parshat Vayechi, when we get to Parshat Vayechi, and we learn about Yaakov telling his son Yosef, please perform an act of chesed and emes, right? Which is my burial. It is a time of truth. But please bring in some chesed into the picture. Infuse the emes with chesed. That is what Judaism is about, to bring them together. Be sure they come together. So this is really what the portion is teaching us. And it is a portion that ends with Yitzchak being comforted after the loss of his mother. And we deal with pain in life, right? We deal with many, many challenges that we face as part of our human existence. But when we see continuity and we build a future of chesed, indeed, we are fulfilling our responsibility of doing chesed, but it's a chesed ve'emes. Yes.
Is it significant that both of those parshios have the word chai in them?
Very good, you see. Excellent, excellent. How to live indeed. How to live indeed. Have your chesed and emes brought together. Infuse the chesed, the emes, and the emes into chesed. Thank you so much for, sorry about a little bit of a different style today, but everyone have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you.
Go ahead.